his way out of whatever scandal arose. And as you mentioned, it's been a long row of scandals. The most notable probably the Partygate scandal, the lockdown parties that were being had in Downing Street at the same time during the height of the corona crisis, when the rest of the country was sort of stuck in their own apartments and people dying in hospital lonely without their families at their side. At the same time, there was drinking and partying and music in Downing Street, which was strictly forbidden under the rules that Boris Johnson had made himself. And after that, there was an outpouring of public anger, people saying, yeah, there's one rule for us and there's another rule for the party and for Boris Johnson in Downing Street, for the people who govern us. And that is something that went down really badly. In the end, the straw that broke the camel's back was a sort of minor sex scandal. One of his MPs trusted was being a whip in the Conservative Party here in Parliament, where it was groping one night last week some junior Conservative Party members, and he denied it. He lied again, and it was the lies in the end and the accumulation of all these scandals that it brought him down.
And it's now Johnson who's feeling lonely, I'm sure. But will he get his last wish to at least stay on as caretaker Prime Minister until the Tories elect a new leader?
It doesn't look very likely at all, Ben, because his own party is furious. He can't even fill his own cabinet posts because so many people have left now. And it would be politically completely suicidal to now step back up and say, OK, I've had second thoughts. I'll sort of go with Boris Johnson till the end, after all. That would be madness for any politician here in Westminster. So he really has lost his grip on office. And there is many major and senior party voices who now say, it's over. We want elections within the party, choosing a new candidate to become Prime Minister as soon as possible, even before the summer break, and not have this long, drawn-out agony with Boris Johnson clinging on in Downing Street, and sort of then finally, maybe in early October, leaving office. So the majority of Conservative MPs, they want a quick and fast cut.
Barbara Wiesel, we'll be talking to you throughout the day. Thanks for bringing us the latest on that breaking news. Well, after winning a resounding majority at the last UK election in December 2019, Boris Johnson lasted just 3 years as Prime Minister. Back then, he stood on a platform to get Brexit done. But long before he became leader, he'd made no secret of the fact that he wanted the top job in British politics.
In hindsight, Boris Johnson's fate was predestined. As the maverick Mayor of London, he relished chaos, getting stuck on a zip wire and barging his way around the world. This time, taking out a schoolboy in Japan. It was all part of a carefully constructed image
Next stop, Downing Street, Boris.
That he hoped would lead to bigger things. And when Britain debated its membership of the European Union, he seized his chance, flying the flag for the Leave campaign.
And take back control of this country and our democracy and our economy.
After that success, Downing Street seemed inevitable. But he would have to wait another 3 years before ousting Theresa May.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen.
However, Britain was still fiercely divided over Europe.
This is the get Brexit done. This is the perfect metaphor for what we're going to do.
Johnson called an election and was back to his old stunts. The voters lapped it up, sending him back to Downing Street with an 80-seat majority. He promised to remake Britain. 1 month later, COVID-19 struck.
I've developed mild symptoms of the coronavirus, that's to say.
He was hospitalised, and the pandemic forced him to get tough with the public.
If you don't follow the rules, the police will have the powers to...
It later emerged he had defied his own advice, with allegations of numerous parties in his offices, including this garden get-together while the country was in lockdown. The pressure on him grew by the week.
Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
In the name of God, go.
Throughout his career, Boris Johnson played by his own rules. In the end, it was that which led to his downfall.
And we're expecting Boris Johnson to make a statement shortly after he agreed that he'll resign as British Prime Minister. We'll bring that to you live as soon as he addresses the public. To the war in Ukraine now. Russia says one of its warplanes struck Ukraine's Snake Island in the Black Sea overnight. The attack comes shortly after Ukrainian troops claimed to have raised their flag over the strategically important island. After declaring full control of Luhansk, Russia has begun stepping up its assault on the neighbouring Donetsk region. The city of Slovyansk has become a main target for Russian shelling, but other towns across Ukraine's east are also being bombarded. Missiles struck Kharkiv on Wednesday, destroying a university. Ukrainian forces are digging in with new defensive lines. Officials say Western-supplied weapons are starting to make a difference on the battlefield. DW correspondent Nick Spicer is in Kyiv. He had this update for us on the back and forth over Snake Island and the Russian offensive in the Donbass.
Sure, Ben. Well, Snake Island, first off, is strategically irrelevant and symbolically hugely important for the Russians, it would appear. This is the island from which, at the beginning of the war, Ukrainian soldiers told a Russian warship to go do something to itself. They were captured. The warship was later sunk. It was the Moskva. It was the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So this became very symbolic, that island, all of a sudden. Russian soldiers were deployed to it. They came under heavy Ukrainian fire, and ultimately they left the island on the 30th of June. And Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, said this was a symbolic gesture in order to facilitate the shipment of grain from the port of Odessa. But it's one step of about 10 that need to be taken before that happens. It just looked like it was an indefensible island. It's close to Bulgaria. So that messaging really from the Kremlin is to suggest there are only about 2 or 3 people allegedly killed, that, Russia is winning important symbolic victories, but strategically irrelevant. The rest of the war, as you just described, taking place in the east of the country, where the Ukrainians have repositioned themselves in order to defend Donetsk province, pretty much giving up on Luhansk, avoiding getting caught in the cauldron the Russians were trying to capture them within in order to capture soldiers or kill as many as possible. So taking up positions to defend the strategically important towns of Slovyansk in particular.
President Zelensky says heavy weapons from the West are now working at full capacity. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
Finally, we can feel that the Western artillery, the weapons we received from our partners, have started working very effectively. Their accuracy is exactly what is needed. Our defenders inflict very noticeable strikes on depots and other locations that are important for the occupiers' logistics, and this significantly reduces the offensive potential of the Russian army. Their losses will only increase every week, as will the difficulty of supplying them.
Nick, how much of a difference will these Western weapons make?
I think the Ukrainian president can be believed in this instance, because the new weapons that are coming in aren't as many as the Ukrainians have been asking for, but they're far more accurate to the weapons they've been using so far. The American-made HIMARS missile system is accurate to within 1 meter. The Russians and Ukrainians are using systems that are accurate to within 500 meters, which is to say that if the Ukrainians need to hit a big stash of howitzer shells, which is what they're targeting when they're talking about depots, they can take it out. And that's important because the Russians have been basically putting into practice Stalin's old dictum, quantity has a quality all of its own. So they've just been shelling and shelling and shelling indiscriminately, and that's how they've been able to advance. If you take out those weapons supplies, then it really puts the Russians on the back foot. Ben?
Nick Spicer there in Kyiv with an update on the war in Ukraine. Thank you. Here's a quick look at some other stories making news around the world. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for a raid on a prison in the Nigerian capital, Abuja. Police are searching for hundreds of inmates on the run after some 900 escaped. Officials say militants used explosives to blast their way in to free fellow members. One guard was killed. Protesters in Sudan have held another nighttime sit-in against military rule. That's after the leader of Sudan's main civilian bloc rejected promises by the army. He says he doesn't believe coup leaders will make way for a civilian government. Protesters have kept up their demonstrations despite security forces cracking down. A Russian-flagged cargo ship suspected of carrying stolen Ukrainian grain has been allowed to leave the Turkish port of Karasu. Ukraine's foreign minister expressed outrage over the decision and summoned Turkey's ambassador. Kyiv had asked Ankara to detain the ship and investigate the alleged theft. The Kremlin denies any wrongdoing. Fans of US basketball star Brittany Griner have held a public rally calling for her safe return from Moscow. Griner has been held for over 4 months on what Russia says are drug charges. US President Joe Biden has told Griner's wife that he is working on winning her freedom. And both anti-abortion and pro-choice protesters in the US have demonstrated outside Mississippi's only abortion clinic on the last day before it closes for good. It's ceasing operations after the state banned all abortions in the wake of the US Supreme Court decision revoking women's constitutional rights to abortion. Climate change is threatening food production around the world and is predicted to push millions of people into poverty. One region is central India, which is where farmers are getting into terrible debt at the moment, partly because of crop losses caused by irregular weather patterns. And it's driving many to suicide. DW's Manira Chowdhury has more from the region of Vidarbha.
There are days when Geeta Chaudhary can't hold back her tears. She lost her husband, Bhanudas, 2 years ago. He took poison. The reason? A debt of rupees 150,000. Just a little more than 1,800 euros. He was a farmer, and he took a loan for farming which he could not pay back.
I never thought he could take such a step and go away. Before he took his life, he used to be tense, irritable. He used to keep to himself, and the day he took his life, he said nothing at all to anyone.
Geeta now takes care of the farm with the help of her son. She says things have become more difficult since Bhanudas died. She is not alone in her grief. In the past decades, tens of thousands of farmers, most of whom sowed cotton, have taken their lives in the Vidarbha region of central India. This area has come to be called the graveyard of farmers. Farmers often have to borrow money to buy seeds and fertilizer. Crop failures or poor yield means they cannot pay the money back. They fall into a cycle of debt and misery. They say they're not getting enough support from the government. Harish Bhagat, a farm activist and a farmer himself, is trying to help. He says the cost of cultivation is increasing. At the same time, erratic monsoon rains and the vagaries linked to climate change are adding to the farmers' distress.
Day by day, a farmer's debt keeps increasing. He starts feeling depressed. After that, he begins to question why he's alive if he is not able to properly nourish and educate his children.
Kanta Narayan Mogre knows that depression well. Her husband died by suicide in 2015, unable to pay back his farm debt of rupees 50,000 or about 600 euros.
Nobody should go through what I faced. My children suffered, they couldn't complete their education.
While Kanta got some financial help from the government, most do not manage to get the meager state compensation to families of farmers who die by suicide.
I had to struggle a lot. I went to the authorities multiple times for the compensation, but they kept refusing.
Geeta regrets that her husband did not talk to her in detail about his financial problems. Maybe she could have helped. Her hopes and ambitions are not big. Now, she just wants to survive so she can bring up her son.
It was the worst accident in the history of Italian motorways. Almost 4 years ago, the Morandi bridge collapsed in Genoa in northern Italy. Now 59 people are facing charges over their role in the collapse that claimed dozens of lives. They're accused of negligence after a report found inspections on the bridge had been inadequate. The trial has opened in Genoa's largest court and is likely to last more than a year.
This is the moment the Morandi bridge collapsed during a rainstorm in August 2018. Most of the 43 people who were killed that day plunged to their deaths in trucks and cars as the ground dropped beneath them. It was later found that poor maintenance was the reason the motorway collapsed. The tragedy sparked nationwide anger here in Italy and laid bare the dire state of the country's crumbling infrastructure. Egle Possetti's sister Claudia, her 2 children and new husband lost their lives in the accident. Egle refused the compensation offered to victims. Instead, she wants accountability.
I would like to see these people pay for what they did. If this is the decision of the court, I would like to see them go to jail. I would like this to be a sign that changes the course of what we're seeing, which is everybody acts like they want and it's fine, and the victims are the only ones who pay.
A judge in Genoa has ordered 59 people to stand trial over the collapse of the Morandi bridge. Among them are senior executives of the company that oversees Italy's roads. The trial is expected to last at least a year, and special arrangements have been made at the court to accommodate the large number of people in the public gallery.
As far as I know, a case like this has never been seen in Italy, especially as far as the consequences and the number of victims are concerned. The prosecution is pursuing charges of manslaughter due to the collapse of the bridge and also a series of violations regarding the maintenance of the bridge that led to the fall of the structure.
It's not just the families of the dead seeking justice in this trial. There are people who say they lost income because of the bridge's collapse, and they want to be compensated.
This neighborhood borders the site of where the bridge collapsed, and the locals here have told me it was a real nightmare getting in and around the area in the aftermath of that accident. As a result, some businesses were forced to close. Many of them have never come back.
The Morandi bridge was taken down and replaced by this new one, which was opened 2 years ago. While others have moved on, Egle Possetti says she hopes she'll get some closure when the trial is over.
And let's bring in Christine, who's following the trial for us. What can we expect from this trial, Christine?
Ben, you're going to hear the prosecution go after specifically some of those directors who were working for the company that was in charge of looking after this bridge. The allegation the prosecution is levelling against some of these directors is that they were aware of the risk of this bridge collapsing, that it was clear that this bridge required specific maintenance because of how old the bridge is, because of the increased traffic volumes, and of course weather patterns changing. This was a bridge that needed a lot of work and maintenance, but that these directors didn't do the necessary investment in this maintenance, opting for cheaper solutions rather than making the full commitment financially to actually do that. And the prosecution alleges the reason they did that was that they were thinking in the interest of preserving dividends for shareholders. So that's going to be one aspect of it. And then there are private lawyers who are representing individuals and companies who say as a result of that bridge having come down, the disruption because it was difficult to get in and around, they have lost income, they've lost business, and they are seeking compensation for the losses they say they have incurred as a result of the 2 years that the bridge was not available.
That would be a horrible business back story to all of this. Tell me about the defendants. Have they admitted to any of these charges?
Well, some of the defence lawyers are positive about the fact that these charges are going to fall away. For example, one of the defence lawyers was quoted in local media saying the charges against his client would fall away like an autumn leaf. No one has faced trial up until this point, and we have to point out that the companies themselves, because they've paid out compensation and made reached agreements with the prosecutor's office, some victims have been compensated. So the companies aren't on trial necessarily, but the prosecution has gone for certain individuals. For example, the chief executive officer who was running the company, who was in charge of the company that was looking after the bridges at the time. So he has since been removed from office and replaced. The wealthy Italian family that had a big stake in that company was forced to sell it. But what the victims really want, especially the people who lost loved ones, is justice. And it's unclear if this particular trial is going to deliver that justice. But the fact that it has gone to trial, that a judge ordered this trial, they say is a positive step forward.
Has anything changed since the bridge collapse as far as infrastructure goes in Italy?
Ben, I can tell you that this tragedy really opened a national conversation, and of course it highlighted the state of infrastructure, not just here in Italy, but I have to point out across Europe as well, where you have bridges all over this continent effectively in very bad shape. But here in the country there was a conversation, not just about the state of infrastructure, but just how the public servants are not doing the work that they ought to be doing. And there was a lot of anger in the sense that there is nobody that's been held to account. Italy has had about 15 bridge collapses. Of course, the Genoa bridge collapse was the most tragic among those collapses. But it did open and force a national conversation. There has been some work done after that, but certainly a lot more needs to be done here on that front, Ben.
DW correspondent Christine Mahunwa, thank you very much for your reporting from Genoa there. Around 1 million Muslim pilgrims are visiting Mecca for the first Hajj in 2 years without strict pandemic restrictions. For the last 2 years, Saudi authorities limited access to only a small number of Saudi residents. According to the Quran, all Muslims capable of going on the Hajj should do so at least once in their lifetimes.
At Islam's most sacred site, the crowds are finally back. After 2 years without pilgrims from abroad, the Hajj is getting back to normal. But while masks and social distancing are out, some restrictions do remain. Touching or kissing the Kaaba is still banned, and visitors had to be vaccinated and tested against the coronavirus, as well as under 65. For the pilgrims fortunate enough to be able to come, being here is often a dream come true. I've been dreaming of this day for over 12 years. I've been saving money for 3 years. I was supposed to come last year, but couldn't because of the coronavirus. Pilgrims coming from Europe, America and Australia this year were forced to use a much criticised lottery system, where trip packages started at around $6,000. According to the Saudi authorities, the new system protects visitors from scams and varying prices. But the new hurdles didn't dissuade this man, who spent the last 11 months walking to Mecca from the UK. I cried when I first arrived. It's an unbelievable feeling, which leaves me at a loss for words. I feel serene and very close to God, with so much spirituality. But while around 1 million pilgrims may be back in Mecca, there's still some ways to go before the Hajj returns to its true pre-pandemic scale.
We'd like to return to our top story now. Britain's embattled Prime Minister Boris Johnson has agreed to resign. Following an open revolt from his fellow Conservatives, he's expected to make a statement to the public shortly. More than 50 ministers, including senior members of his team, have stepped down, citing a lack of confidence in Johnson's leadership. Sources say Johnson may resign as Conservative Party leader but stay on as Prime Minister until a new leader is installed. It'd bring an end to an unprecedented standoff that's threatened to paralyse the British government. Let's go over to our correspondent Barbara Wiesel. She's standing by in London. Barbara, tell me, how much of a shock was this to you today, or did it not come to you as a shock at all?
No, it really didn't come as a shock because since Rishi Sunak, his Chancellor of the Exchequer, and his Health Minister, one of the most notable members of his parliament, since those two big beasts, if I may say so, stepped down on Wednesday, it was pretty clear that Boris Johnson was on a slippery slope, that this was just the beginning of the end. And it was clear that he had somehow exasperated his own Tory members so much, and particularly his own parliamentarians, by lying to them again and again, by telling all sorts of fibs, making excuses and pretending to have forgotten something that then it turned out had clearly happened, that they suddenly felt that they wouldn't want to go on like this anymore. It's a collective sort of thing. You know, if someone makes the beginning, then people will feel, yes, this is the moment, we have to end this, we can't carry on like this. And it was just like a stampede out of the offices in Downing Street and of course out of his cabinet, because people were really ready to say enough is enough, we are going, you have to step down, Prime Minister. And it took him 2 days to understand this and to finally accept it.
While we wait for the statement from Boris Johnson, what kind of Prime Minister will he go down in history as?
He will have a much lesser place in history than he would have wanted for himself, because a certain grandiosity is part of his character. He thinks he is one of the biggest and most notable politicians of his time, and in the end, what is he? What will he be leaving? Not much. He did get Brexit done in a certain way. That was his slogan during his election campaign in 2019. But it's also still lingering on. It's not really done because the whole Northern Ireland problem is carrying on. He got into numerous spats with France about fishing, about refugees and migrants crossing the channel. He is not well liked among other European leaders because they have found that he is not trustworthy, that he doesn't keep his word, that you can't really trust his straightness, the way that he announces a policy and the way he will then implement it. So he has not many friends on the international stage, and no tears will be wept for him there. And what will he leave really is the general idea of government in chaos, a government that never really got it together, that never really managed to sort of formulate a policy, something that where are we going, how are we going to get there, what will we be doing? They're just jumping from puddle to puddle and patching up problems here and difficulties there. And so that is what he will go down for in history.
We'll have to stop there, Barbara.
Prime Minister
Boris Johnson is now stepping out to address the media.
Thank you. It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister. And I've agreed with Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of our backbench MPs, that the process of choosing that new leader should begin now. And the timetable will be announced next week. And I've today appointed a cabinet to serve, as I will, until a new leader is in place. So I want to say to the millions of people who voted for us in 2019, many of them voting Conservative for the first time, thank you for that incredible mandate, the biggest Conservative majority since 1987, the biggest share of the vote since 1979. And the reason I have fought so hard in the last few days to continue to deliver that mandate in person was not just because I wanted to do so, but because I felt it was my job, my duty, my obligation to you to continue to do what we promised in 2019. And of course, I'm immensely proud of the achievements of this government, from getting Brexit done to settling our relations with the continent for over half a century, reclaiming the power for this country to make its own laws in Parliament, getting us all through the pandemic, delivering the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, the fastest exit from lockdown, and in the last few months, leading the West in standing up to Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And let me say now to the people of Ukraine, that I know that we in the UK will continue to back your fight for freedom for as long as it takes. And at the same time, in this country, we've been pushing forward a vast programme of investment in infrastructure and skills and technology, the biggest in a century, because if I have one insight into human beings, it is that genius and talent and enthusiasm and imagination are evenly distributed throughout the population, but opportunity is not. And that's why we must keep levelling up, keep unleashing the potential of every part of the United Kingdom. And if we can do that in this country, we will be the most prosperous in Europe. And in the last few days, I've tried to persuade my colleagues that it would be eccentric to change governments when we're delivering so much, and when we have such a vast mandate, and when we're actually only a handful of points behind in the polls, even in mid-term after quite a few months of pretty relentless sledging, and when the economic scene is so difficult domestically and internationally. And I regret not to have been successful in those arguments, and of course it's painful not to be able to see through so many ideas and projects myself. But as we've seen at Westminster, the herd instinct is powerful. When the herd moves, it moves. And my friends, in politics, no one is remotely indispensable. And our brilliant and Darwinian system will produce another leader equally committed to taking this country forward through tough times, not just helping families to get through it, but changing and improving the way we do things, cutting burdens on businesses and families, and yes, cutting taxes, because that is the way to generate the growth and the income we need to pay for great public services. And to that new leader, I say, whoever he or she may be, I say I will give you as much support as I can. And to you, the British public, I know that there will be many people who are relieved, and perhaps quite a few who will also be disappointed. And I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. I want to thank Carrie and our children and all the members of my family who have had to put up with so much for so long. I want to thank the peerless British civil service for all the help and support that you have given our police, our emergency services, and of course our fantastic NHS, who at critical moment helped to extend my own period in office, as well as our armed services and our agencies that are so admired around the world, and our indefatigable Conservative Party members and supporters, whose selfless campaigning makes our democracy possible. I want to thank the wonderful staff here at Chequers, here at Number 10, and of course at Chequers, and our fantastic prop force detectives, the one group, by the way, who never leak. Above all, I want to thank you, the British public, for the immense privilege that you have given me. And I want you to know that from now on until the new Prime Minister is in place, your interests will be served and the government of the country will be carried on. Being Prime Minister is an education in itself. I've travelled to every part of the United Kingdom, and in addition to the beauty of our natural world, I've found so many people possessed of such boundless British originality and so willing to tackle old problems in new ways that I know that even if things can sometimes seem dark now, our future together is golden. Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Boris Johnson talking about the search for a new Prime Minister. He said a timetable will be put together next week. He also said a new cabinet will rule along with him until a new leader is found. Well, let's see how that plan pans out. Let's bring in our correspondent, Barbara Wiesel, who's been following events for us in London. A defiant statement there by Boris Johnson. What did you make of it?
Yeah, I mean, he did remind people, and his own party, of course, one more time of this huge election success he had in 2019. It was really a majority of 80 parliamentarians, something that had not been seen for decades here in Westminster. But, as his critics say, he managed to fritter it away in only 3 years. He could have had 2 more years running here, but he has come to the end of his line through a devastating sort of accumulation of scandals, through his own personal weaknesses, through constant fibbing and sort of avoiding the truth, and for not getting people what he was just talking about in his statement there. The economic success that he had tied to Brexit, that remained elusive. Quite the opposite. Brexit cost the British economy quite substantially, and so therefore he couldn't really sort of do what his supposedly main policy was, the infamous levelling up, bringing the poor and socially weaker north of the country up to London levels, up to the success and the wealth that the capital enjoys. That never happened. He never even got it off the ground. And so in the end, he must admit, if only to himself, that those 3 years largely had been a failure.
Yeah, and we heard the boos in the background outside Downing Street. One person shouting liar. The British economy is in a slump. People sound fed up. What's the likelihood of Johnson now staying on until autumn? How likely is that to happen?
It's not very likely at all, because the country is suffering and will be undergoing a summer of discontent. People are absolutely afraid of the rises in energy prices that are to be expected around September. They're going to triple for many poorer and poorer families here in Great Britain. This is going to be devastating. The use of food banks has multiplied already throughout the last months. And Britain is in the ranks of the OECD among the industrial countries of Europe, at the bottom, way below France and Germany and some others even. So no, it has not been going well. There are rolling strikes this summer, so there needs to be somebody at the helm who sort of takes the grip and tries to steer the ship here. What the country doesn't need, and it seems that the Conservative Party is very aware of this, is a long drawn out agony with Boris Johnson in office but not in power. So they will be pushing for a leadership contest as soon and as fast as possible.
Barbara, you often report from Brussels. How has the chaos of British politics in recent days been going down there?
It's not gone down well at all, particularly the whole Northern Ireland saga. I mean, at a time when all countries in Europe have economic problems, when everyone is confronted by the war in Ukraine and the economic fallout of it, and of course the military problems this is creating, and within NATO, this whole sort of reorientation of European politics, Boris Johnson chose to sort of try to reopen the Northern Ireland Protocol, the part of Brexit, the Brexit deal that deals with particularly with the borders in Northern Ireland. And everybody in Brussels just threw up their hands and said, for heaven's sake, why now? Don't do this. But that was Boris Johnson. He was also in a way unpredictable and loved to sort of create chaos, a chaos which he thought was creative, but in the end was just chaotic. So no tears will be wept for him in Brussels whatsoever, particularly also because he was not seen as a trustworthy partner, somebody you could talk to and who would then keep his word. And therefore, his stepping down will be probably greeted with a slight sigh of relief.
So Boris Johnson on his way out, as you heard here on DW in this breaking news we've been bringing for you, and a new Prime Minister, the process beginning, but a successor still elusive, and a long line of would-be successors. Isn't that true, Barbara?
A very long line. I mean, you look at the papers this morning and all the pictures look at you and think, for heaven's sake, everybody and their aunt wants to be prime minister. You think there wouldn't be quite so many conservative politicians thinking they would be fit for high office. However, I did look at the odds of the biggest British betting firm in the meantime. And the surprising thing is that number one is a lady who was called Penny Mordaunt, not largely known outside of Britain, and she's the International Trade Secretary. She's sort of like a centrist, a middle-of-the-road conservative who could probably please all parts except for the Brexit hardliners, but all other parts of the country, so-called one nation Tory. And then she is followed by Ben Wallace, the defense minister, who has been a very strong figure since the war in Ukraine broke out, and then followed by the chancellor, who now stepped down, ex-chancellor of the Exchequer, Rishi Sunak. So there are some bigger beasts and some surprises in there.
Barbara Wiesel reporting for us from London on the resignation of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Thank you. And thank you for watching. I'll be back next hour with more world news. Until then, go to our website, dw.com. Bye-bye.
How can this passionate hatred of a people be explained?
A history of anti-Semitism is a history of stigmatization and exclusion, of religious and political power struggles.
Christianity wants to convert.